It was a cold December night, just a week before Christmas. My family had a special tradition. We always spent Christmas at our vacation home in the Hamptons, New York. The Hamptons were usually quiet at this time of year, as most of the homes there belonged to wealthy people who only came here during the summer. That year, my dad and I arrived early because my mom and sister were still working until the weekend. My dad was retired and I had just started my winter break, so we decided to leave early to enjoy the peace. The house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, secluded and very quiet. As soon as we got there, my dad turned on the heat, water, and checked everything, as he usually did after not being there for a few months. I brought my PS3 to entertain myself in my room. I spent the whole day playing games, not paying any attention to the outside world. The first night, a big snowstorm swept through. That was the reason we left early, to avoid driving in bad conditions. The next morning, when I went to the kitchen, my father asked me a question that surprised me. "When did you make a snowman in the backyard?" I frowned. "What snowman?" My father led me to the window. Sure enough, in the middle of the snow-covered yard, there was a snowman standing there. 2 dry branches were used as arms, reaching up as if to greet him, and a face with eyes and a strange smile was carved on its head. The snowman faced straight towards the kitchen window. I immediately said that I didn't do it. My father just laughed and said that it must be some naughty neighbor kids. At first, I thought the same thing, but things quickly became scary. The next night, I was sleeping when I was suddenly awakened by a clear pop sound coming from my bedroom window. A feeling of fear came over me. I pulled the blanket over myself, not daring to move. In my mind, I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was just snow falling from the roof. After a few minutes, curiosity overcame my fear. I crept to the window and opened the curtains to look. I immediately screamed in panic. Standing right outside the window was another snowman with an angry frown on his face, as if he was staring at me. My father rushed into the room when he heard the scream. I pointed to the window. He saw the snowman, and this time he was no longer calm. He said he would go to the neighbor's house tomorrow morning to talk. I was so scared that I didn't dare sleep in my room, but had to move to my sister's room. The next morning, my father went to the neighbor's house to knock on the door, but no one was home. The driveway was empty, indicating that they were not in town. This was also the only house near us with children, so things became even more mysterious. The following days passed peacefully. Nothing unusual happened until Christmas Eve. That evening, our entire family, my grandparents, my mother, and my sister, were all present. The house was filled with a warm atmosphere as we gathered in the living room, waiting for dinner. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. It wasn't a bell, but a slow, rhythmic tapping. My father stood up and asked loudly, "Who is it?" From the other side of the door, an unfamiliar voice said, "Please let me in." "I need help." The door had no peephole, nor any window to look out. None of us dared to open the door. My father continued, "What's going on?" The voice replied, "I have no one to spend Christmas with. Please help me." The atmosphere in the house suddenly became heavy. We all looked at each other. No one dared to say anything. Finally, my father said loudly, "Please leave before I call the police." After a moment of silence, the voice replied, "Okay, I'll go. Don't call the police." The next morning, when we opened the door, there was a note taped to it. In scrawled handwriting, it read, "I just wanted to have some fun. I made a snowman for the little boy in the house. I don't have anyone to spend Christmas with." The whole family shivered. Whether this person had bad intentions or not, his actions were too scary to be taken as a joke. We never spent Christmas in the Hamptons again. Christmas 2016. My name is Andre. I was 21 years old. My family decided to go to my Uncle Joshua's house in downtown Miami to celebrate the holidays. We are from Connecticut, so enjoying the warm weather in Miami during the holidays was exciting. On the Friday before Christmas Eve, my brother Nico, who was 18 at the time, and I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to go out. Miami was filled with Christmas-themed parties. Nico had a fake ID, so we thought everything would be fine. We first went to a club on Miami Beach that was hosting a special event, but when we got to the door, the bouncer not only asked for a $100 entrance fee, but also found Nico's fake ID. We both left in frustration and went to a nearby bar. The bar was quite lively. As I sat drinking, an older woman suddenly approached Nico. She looked to be in her 40s, wearing a blue Christmas hat and a rather provocative sweater with a festive pattern. I heard her complimenting Nico over and over again, saying that she liked young men with Spanish accents. This struck me as odd and a little creepy, but Nico seemed amused, so I let him go. After a while, Nico tapped me on the shoulder and said he was leaving with the woman. I smiled and said, "Have fun," thinking he had a lucky night. The strange call. I didn't stay at the bar long after that, calling an Uber to go back to my uncle's house. As we drove, my phone rang. It was Nico. I picked it up, but all I heard was static, mixed with a man's voice that wasn't Nico. Then suddenly I heard a loud voice shouting, "Andre! Help me!" I called back in a panic, but after a few calls, an older man finally answered. His voice was low and cold. When I asked who he was and why he had Nico's phone, he just smiled faintly and didn't answer. But in the background, I could clearly hear Nico screaming, calling for help in fear. When the call ended, I explained the situation to the Uber driver in a trembling voice and immediately called the police. The chase in the dark. After returning to my uncle's house, my father and the police went to the bar to look for clues. But as soon as we got there, a call came from an unknown number. It was Nico. He said in a ragged breath that he had escaped after being kidnapped. We immediately drove to the address he had given us, a dark and dangerous alley in North Miami. When we found Nico, I couldn't recognize him anymore. His face was bloody, his eyes were black, and all his belongings had been stolen. Nico said the woman lured him into a car, saying it was her Uber, but there were two men waiting in the car. They restrained Nico, punched him, and threatened to kill him if he didn't shut up. While the car stopped, Nico ran as fast as he could, and luckily they didn't chase him. The ghost of Christmas. Although Nico returned safely, our holiday was overshadowed by what happened. But the haunting didn't stop there. On Christmas Eve, the whole family was awakened by Nico's screams. He screamed in his nightmares, repeating, "She's in the house." That sentence sent shivers down our spines. Even though it was just a dream, Nico's terrified eyes kept me awake. To this day, the image of the woman with the blue hat and the creepy smile still haunts me. Nico never dared to return to Miami. On Christmas Day 2016, my brother George and I decided to have a party at our new house we had just bought. The small house was located near a forest, peaceful and secluded, making it an ideal place for a family gathering during the holidays. That year, my parents, aunts, uncles, sister, husband, and two nephews came. My sister also brought Mika, the family's small dog. Since she lived 2 hours away from us, the whole family stayed overnight. The party went well. When dinner was over, we sat in the living room, drank wine, and watched Christmas movies. During the conversation, the topic suddenly turned to recent murders. The bodies found in the forest nearby had left the whole family horrified. However, my mother and sister quickly changed the subject to keep the atmosphere cheerful. At around 10 p.m., the guests started to leave, leaving only me, George, my sister, and her small family. The kids went to bed early, leaving the four of us adults to chat a little more before falling asleep ourselves. I was woken around 2 a.m. by my girlfriend, who had arrived late to spend the night with me. She shook me awake and whispered, "Listen!" In the silence of the night, Mika's growling echoed from the hallway. I jumped up, stepped outside, and found the back door wide open, letting in a cold wind. Mika stood there, staring into the darkness. Suddenly, I heard George calling my name from the woods. His voice sounded distant, as if he needed help. My instinct told me something was wrong, but I quickly put on my coat and boots. Following the faint footprints in the snow, I walked deeper into the woods, calling out, "George, where are you?" His voice echoed back, but each time I got closer, the voice remained distant. The footprints gradually disappeared, and darkness enveloped me. After a few minutes, I decided to call George to confirm. He didn't answer. As I continued to walk further, his voice suddenly stopped, leaving the space in an eerie silence. My phone suddenly rang. It was my girlfriend. "Chet, where are you? George is sleeping in the room." I was stunned. It was impossible. I had heard his voice so clearly, Panicking, I turned and ran towards the dim light from the backyard. When I returned, the whole family was awake. I told them the whole story, from the wide open door, the footprints in the snow, to George's voice calling in the woods. Everyone was scared. We called the police. They came and listened to my story. They checked around, but found nothing. They just told us to be more careful and report immediately if anything unusual happened. The whole family stayed awake that night. No one dared to sleep. That strange voice still haunts me, and I cannot explain what happened in the forest that Christmas night.